Hello again, everybody. If it's your first time with us here, welcome. If you've been with us before, welcome back to Chess with Nick, continuing on the Road to NM series and bringing you part 2 of my experience from the Florida State Championships. So in the first round, we looked at how I kicked things off against Renato Dominguez, and now we're going to bring you day 2 of the action from Saturday of the 4-day tournament over Labor Day weekend. In round 2, I got to play a very talented young opponent, Cecilia Yeragenu, and she not only is a very strong up-and-coming talent, her rating really does not do her justice at all. 1749 her current live rating, but online is over 2,000 for USCF online play, has increased significantly over the pandemic, and also she is the reigning Florida State girls champion. So she won the girls tournament and was able to compete in New Jersey at the championship for the various state winners in that tournament as well. So a very strong opponent who I had in this one. And we reached this position out of a French exchange. So as we go through this game, we're going to be looking at some different highlights, what happened, how I was able to take advantage of the nuances of the position here. And with every game, like we mentioned before, we're going to try to look at some different themes. And in this game, the theme is going to be about where to place our pieces. What are the best squares? How should we be maneuvering our pieces in order to achieve their maximum potential so that we can try to win the game? So let's go ahead, dive right into the action, round 2 from the Florida State Championships. Like we mentioned before, this position occurred out of an exchange French. Black has his bishop in a fianchetto setup over here. White, Cecilia is using her bishop to pin my knight to the queen, but this knight on c3 isn't currently doing particularly much. With black structure on b7, c6, and d5, it's hard for that knight to find somewhere to go. These squares are being controlled. Now, the downside for black at the moment, of course, is these two pieces on c8 and b8, the knight and the bishop, really have not yet come into the game. So, on the one side, black is doing a good job of controlling white's activity. White's pieces are all developed, but the knight, the bishop, and the knight really aren't on great squares. They don't have a lot of good places to go to. This diagonal isn't very good for attacking. These squares are under attack or control of the pawn, so the knights and the bishop don't have a lot of active things to do, and this is one thing that you want to pay attention to when you're figuring out where to set up your pieces, is not just making sure that they develop, not just bringing them into the game, but where are the best squares for them? How can you maximize the use of their pieces and make sure that you're able to develop not only just 2 squares, but 2 effective squares? Well, my next move was bishop to e6, and this may seem a little counterintuitive with the question we just asked. What is this bishop really doing on e6? It's aiming at its own pawn, protecting f7, but not really doing much more active. The whole point behind this move, bishop e6, really isn't to develop the bishop, because this is not a great square, e6 for the bishop, but the point is to make space for my other pieces. I want to play knight to d7 without getting in the way of the bishop. I'd really like to move this knight potentially over to f8 and maybe bring this knight even to the e6 square. But in order to do that, I don't want white to get control of the e-file. So for example, if instead of bishop e6 I played a move like knight to d7, well, white could trade rooks here, and after queen takes, white can bring the other rook to e1. I'll have to move away, and suddenly white gains control over the e-file. So the real point behind bishop to e6 is not so much developing, but closing off the e-file, making sure I keep space for my knight, and going about a longer plan of my development. I'm going to try to reorganize my pieces and contest all of the squares that white will potentially fight for. So already I'm adopting a more slow style of play. The main things that I would want to look out for here is this e5 square looks pretty dangerous if white could plop a knight on there, but white's knights are very far away from e5 with the setup that Cecilia has gone for in this opening. So after bishop to e6, white played the move b3, and This is a move which is preparing to reroute the knight and play the move c4, so white is going to try to do some queenside expansion, but it still requires a little bit of preparation in order to achieve this. I played knight bd7, continuing with our plan. We're going to move this knight, reroute it, and find a more active route for it. And white played the move knight c to e2, also continuing with the same ideas. Now c4 is prepared to be played as well. I played the move knight to f8, and Cicero, rather than playing the move c4 immediately here, she decided to prepare this move even further by playing rook a to c1. And what she wants to do is she wants to push this pawn, and when the c-file opens up, say, hey, look, I've got my rook on the more active file. It's better here than on a1. Now, the problem with this is that with two of her last three moves, Cicero has created a small weakness. And what would that weakness be? Well, she played the moves b3 and rook a to c1, and because of this, suddenly this a3 pawn is sort of floating out here in the breeze. So I tried to take advantage of this, and I played the move queen to d6. Simply improving my queen just a little bit. It's not a big developing move. Of course, white can even kick it with moves like bishop to f4, but the point is we're immediately attacking this pawn, putting some pressure on that a3 pawn, and we're connecting the rooks and trying to figure out how I want to reorganize my pieces. Cicero played the move a4, and once again, this is sort of my point behind queen d6. I want white to have to waste tempo defending the weakness, and now I can continue going about my plans for reorganizing my pieces. The next move here is a little bit awkward looking. Now, if you remember what I talked about a couple moves ago, this knight that was on b8 is making a long journey to try to come to this e6 square. And part of what I need to do to get that knight to e6 is going to be to move the bishop, but where should the bishop go? Well, if the bishop comes to g4, white can just kick it with either f3 or h3, either offer the trade or just force me back. So really, moving forward to g4 isn't going to accomplish anything for me, except maybe provoking a weakness from white. It could be somewhat useful to play bishop g4 and then to retreat, but of course it won't last on g4. Bishop f5 doesn't look correct because there's too much control over that square with white's knight and bishop. And then the question is bishop d7 or bishop to c8. And I decided to play the move bishop to c8. And this looks a little bit awkward. Of course, we're disconnecting the rooks, which have just become connected. We're placing the bishop back on its starting square. But the point is, if we play bishop d7, white has this move bishop to f4, and suddenly queen d6 maybe doesn't look like it was such a hot idea, because where is this queen going anymore in this structure? It's going to have to move itself either into the position or back to e7 where it becomes in line with white's rook. Neither one of these I was very happy with. So I decided to play bishop c8, take the slow approach, bring my knight to e6, and slowly try to improve my pieces. Here white played the move f3, and I think white could have gone forward with her plan and gone ahead and pushed for this c4 break right away. But f3 is aimed at limiting my own pieces, stopping my knight from coming into the game, and stopping my bishop from going to g4 as well too. But of course I didn't play bishop g4, so that could have been a transposition where it would have been white's move had I done that first. And after f3, of course, I'm going to continue with just what we talked about before. Knight e6, now we're asking black, or white rather, what's he going to do with the g5 bishop? Where is this piece going to go? No longer can it come to f4 to attack the queen, so the bishop slides back to e3, and we see that both sides are doing a lot of maneuvering in this one. We're both jostling for position, but from back a few moves ago, I think it's black who's starting to get a little bit better. This knight has gone from b8 to e6. That's definitely an improvement. The queen is on d6 over d8, maybe slightly better. This bishop has only retreated. This knight has only retreated. And white still has yet to break with c4 or get anything going. So now comes a big decision for black. I've rerouted my knight, I've gained a little bit of space back, but how to continue? What is black's aggressive idea? And here I decided to go on the attack and come up with a very fun plan, and that was to play the move h5. So now black is deciding to go on the aggressive h5, threatening the move h4, trying to push your knight even further back, take more space on the king side, and suddenly all of black's pieces are trying to aim toward this king. Everything wants to start flowing this way. This is black's idea with this maneuver. White played the move knight to f4, moving the knight forward into the position, offering a trade of knights, and also freeing up a different square for the g3 knight to retreat to. And I decided here that I was going to continue forward with the position, and I played the move h4. And now there is immediate threat against this knight on g3, so white has to do something about this. White could choose to trade the knights right away, but then the knight will still have to retreat after, and this sort of helps black to get his bishop developed again. So white plays the move knight g to e2, and part of the problem with this maneuvering is that these knights step on each other's toes. There's not a lot of squares for these two knights to go to, and really now after knight g e2, white would be quite happy to trade off this knight and bring his other knight to f4, improve the one that's on the back. So I decided I'm not going to give white the opportunity to do that, and I retreated my knight back again. So all of this pressure is just being maintained, a lot of jostling back and forth for position. The point of knight to f8 is that you can't trade off and improve your back knight. And now this knight on f4 doesn't have anywhere to go. It has no forward squares. The pawns are covering here and here and here and here. The bishop is eyeing this h3 square, so you really don't want to play knight to h3. And pieces are blocking your knight from retreating anywhere on all the other squares. So even though the knight has 8 options to go to, none of them are viable. And maybe black can even think about moves like g5 in the future here. So Sisira decided to play the move knight to c3, more maneuvering, more dancing, and suddenly we've seen one knight go from c3 to e2 to f4, and the other knight went from g3 to e2 to c3. So we essentially took 4 moves for white to reach a position that could have been reached in 2 just by knight g3 and knight f4, moving along those lines. So white is doing a lot of maneuvering here, but I can't say that I really feel white has done much to make progress. And now, I had to make a big decision at this point. This bishop needs to get into the game. I want to connect to my rooks. So I decided to play the move bishop d7. Another very interesting try for black would have been the immediate idea of taking this bishop, offering up the exchange sacrifice with rook takes e3. And the idea behind this, what I was looking at, was either way that my opponent takes, I have moves such as bishop h6, attacking on this diagonal where all of white's pieces will be, and trying to regain material, get a big attack in that manner. Now, I decided that rather than doing this immediately, I would play bishop d7 first, and the point here is that now, if I'm given the chance, I will play rook takes e3 next move, and now I don't have to worry about my back rank near as much. My bishop's guarding the square, and my other rook can even come into the game to participate in the attack. So just preparing everything. If I can, I always want to put all my pieces in those best positions before you look for that decisive break. So rook takes e3 would have been a very exciting way to go, but maybe a little bit of preparation is stronger there. So bishop d7 first. And white played the move knight f to e2. She moved her one knight away. Now she retreats the other knight. And again, rook takes e3 is possible, but it's a little bit different now. And the point is that this knight is really stopping this e-file from being totally open. So if we take and the queen captures, sure, we could put our other rook on the e-file, but the queen will just drop back to f2. And the queen also will be guarding the h6 square, so bishop h6 won't be effective in this moment because the knight's no longer on f4 where it will be pinned. So black played instead knight to h5. f5. I'm trying to improve all of my pieces. Remember, if you can, improve everything to the maximum before going for that decisive break. Again, Sisira is still trying to figure out what to do. White's pieces are all in this little 3x3 box. She has 2 rooks, 2 knights, 2 bishops, and a queen. 7 pieces, all in this tiny box over here. Very cramped. So she is coiled up like a spring and plays the move knight to d1. Again, preparing this push c4, trying to unwind the position. But unfortunately, for all the maneuvering that White has done since we looked in our very first position at the start, there have been tons of knight moves, tons of bishop moves, but nothing is really improving. This doesn't look any better for White, and Black is slowly finding ways of bringing those pieces to better squares. Rook to e7 comes next, simply preparing to double on the d-file. And here, I think another mistake from White with the move knight to b2. Again, Sisira is planning c4. She wants to do everything in her power to make this pawn push happen, though of course she already could have played it. And what I don't like about knight b2 is this knight is moving the wrong way from the action. Black is going to attack the king side. Moves like h3 are coming. The knight is over here already. Everything is ready to attack the white king, and knight to b2 is just moving away from the action. It's not preparing to defend in the best manner possible. So rook to e8, doubling on the file, putting immediate pressure on the bishop, has to retreat to f2. And now Black has all this pressure on the e-file, big attack coming, and a very nice move here that I liked from myself. Every now and then I give myself a pat on the back, and that's the move queen to f6. And what's the point of this move, queen to f6? Well, we know White wants to continue with c4, and of course White also was attacking our pawn here on h4, which is a little bit of a weakness. So queen to f6 defends the h4 pawn, but more importantly, after White plays c4, continuing with her own plan, which she did, what is Black's idea? What is the tactical threat that Sisira has overlooked in the position? Pause your videos, take a moment to find it if you haven't seen the idea already. And this is the big blow. Now Black is ready to crush through h3. And the point is that the queen was not only defending h4, but pressuring the f3 square, and it's only defended by this g2 pawn. h3 forces the removal of the g2 pawn, either by capturing it or having White push it, and then the queen will come crashing into the position. So now White's kingside is ready to fall. Really what White should do is just ignore this and probably play a move like c takes d5, but still, it doesn't look good. Black's attack is what is coming through here. What happens in the game? White played the move g4, and this is a big mistake. Counterattacking the knight. Unfortunately, this loses on the spot. If you don't already see the idea, what's the move to win for Black? Queen takes f3, threatening mate in 1, and White has no good way to respond to this threat. Sisira tried desperately to give up some pieces to stop the mate. Knight f4 was played. Of course, we can just take that knight. And then bishop to f1, stopping mate, but already Black is up a full knight and still continuing the attack. Lots of good moves here, but the move that I played was rook to e2, attacking White's queen and offering the rook as a sacrifice. If you take this rook with the bishop, then of course I'm just going to mate you on g2, so you can't do that. Rook takes e2 was played, and I captured again with the other rook on e2, again threatening the queen. Threatening to take on f7 and mate over this way, threatening to mate on g2 if the bishop takes. So Sisira had to give up even more material to stop these threats. Queen takes f4, sacrificing the queen, but after queen takes f4 and bishop takes e2, now the rook is hanging on c1. Queen takes c1 check, and after knight to d1, Black is up a full queen and a pawn to boot in this position, with the chance to win even more material coming very quickly. My opponent decided to play on and go all the way to checkmate. At this point, the game is certainly lost for white. We'll go through the moves really quickly just to show how the finish. Knight e6 was played, bishop e3, bishop took on d4, pinning the bishop to the king to remove the threat on the queen. After the trades, now of course we're threatening to win another piece by removing the defender. And after king f2, queen d2, the bishop cannot be saved. The knight came over to c3. We decided to trade off a pair of pieces because, well, I can attack this knight again and still win it. And now white is down a queen and a bishop and a pawn, and mate is not far off. The queen chases the king to the edge of the board, and after f6, mate is coming on the next move. What will black play to deliver checkmate after d takes c6? g5, and the game is finally over. So in this game we saw a lot of maneuvering, and that's what we want to highlight, trying to keep those ideas in mind. Look for places where you can put your pieces to maximize their potential. In this game, Cicera and myself, we did an equal amount of maneuvering, but the maneuvering was not beneficial on her end, and it slowly made small improvements on my end until eventually there was able to make a decisive breakthrough. So always make sure you're looking for ways to improve your pieces to their very best possible squares. Well, there were 2 rounds played on Saturday in the Florida State Championship, so we're not going to give you just one game, but both of the games from that day. And in round number 3, after the first 2 wins, I got to play another Jacksonville local, very strong up-and-coming talent who now is over 1,900 already, and that's Advait Nair. He is a very good player. I've gotten to play him many times, especially in quick tournaments in Jacksonville, and it's always a little bumming out when you travel to a new place and still have to play the same local guys, but I certainly was not going to take this game lightly because I knew of the strength that my opponent possessed. Now, this game began with a Trompowsky, which quickly transposed into a Sicilian-type structure. And again in this game, it's a very similar theme to the last game in that it's all about developing the pieces and making sure we're maximizing potential, bringing things to their best possible squares. So what is going on in this position? Well, white already has a little battery over here with the queen on h4 and the bishop on g5, and this makes it very hard for black to develop the c8 bishop, or the f8 bishop, rather. Of course, black's last move, bishop e6, makes it impossible for the e-pawn to push at all, but even g6 is not going to work right now because white can take twice on f6, win a pawn, and threaten black's rook. So black has a little bit of untangling to figure out what to do in this position. Now, one option, of course, would be simply to move this f6 knight, because it's not pinned by any means. You could retreat it to the d7 square and then look to route to e5, or maybe even be aggressive with a move like knight to g4. And this was what I was a little bit worried about in this position, was a move like knight to g4. And because of this, I had to make a decision in how to develop my pieces. Yes, I want to make sure my bishop gets active at some point. b5 looks like the most natural square for that, but at the moment, it may place my bishop in some danger because of moves like knight takes e4, maybe trying to deflect my knight. Doesn't necessarily work right at the moment, but the bishop coming to b5 puts it in the line of some tactical ideas, and I wasn't quite ready to do this just yet. So the knight on g1, where should we place this? Well, we got 3 options, of course, h3, f3, and e2, and after a move like knight to f3, here's where I was a little concerned with the move knight to g4. I wasn't entirely sure what I would do about this threat on the f2 pawn. Of course, there are moves like knight to d5, the bishop could trade it off, and we would be attacking the knight on c6 in addition to this knight over here on g4, so there's a lot of crazy tactics up in the air here. But I decided to adopt a different plan. Rather than go into all of the madness of lines that could arrive after knight f3, knight g4, and I played the move knight to h3. And knight to h3 does a couple things. Well, for one, you might say, why can't black take this knight with his bishop? Of course he can, but my point is that black's last move was bishop to e6, so if black decides to trade off this knight, he's wasted a tempo with his bishop in doing so. And after the trade, I'll recapture with the queen, where now my queen has a lot of flexibility along the third rank, can easily reroute to one side or the other of the board, and I think I'll be able to achieve a very natural development here. My bishop can develop out to b5, and white enjoys a nice position with a little bit more central space right now, and we'll look to improve from there. Yes, this f2 pawn is hanging, but it would be unwise for the queen to dive into this right away. This would be a very big mistake because white can immediately jump on this with a move like maybe even knight to d5, threatening some forks over here on the king side, not to mention other ideas like bishop e3, looking to trap the queen, which looks even stronger looking at that, bishop e3, and where is this queen going? So black certainly doesn't want to go about things in this manner. My opponent did not take the knight, though. Instead, my opponent played the move queen to a5, and again, we see a little bit of maneuvering, kind of like in the game with Sisira. And earlier in the game, my opponent had developed with the move queen b6, put pressure on my b2 pawn, and I had castled queenside. And a lot of times in this particular line of the Trompowsky, the queen really does not belong on b6 for black. It can pressure some of these squares a little bit, but the pressure it provides is not enough for a viable attack, and usually you simply end up having to move the queen again, and that's exactly what happened to my opponent here. So my opponent has sort of said queen b6 was a mistake, I admit it, and now I'm having to put my queen on a better square. So this is causing a little bit of a loss of time. Now, that said, the queen does create some immediate threats. This a2 pawn is under a lot of pressure, and moves like knight to b4 look pretty darn scary. Black could get a very quick attack going against white's queenside. So I made sure to take a move in order to deal with this, and I decided to play the move a3. King to b1 is also playable here. What I liked about a3 is that even though it creates a lever, which could be a longer-term weakness, it helps to keep this knight off of b4, and I really didn't want to have to worry about some of the tactics behind knight b4, especially if this rook gets to c8 and can sacrifice itself for my c3 knight. So these are the sort of things that I'm having to look out for in this Sicilian-like position. Now, my opponent here made another inaccuracy and played the move knight to e5, and this looks like a very normal move, moving the knight toward the center, but already my opponent has broken a couple opening principles. He's made two moves with a queen, he's made two moves with the knight, so both of those are losses of time in a way. There aren't any real immediate threats to the white position. The bishop is locked on the f8 square, and the king is still stuck in the center, so all of this tells me that white should be better at this point in time. White should have the chance to press for something. Now, there are two real sort of ideas that you can go for. One idea here would be to play f4 and immediately put pressure on this knight, say, where's it going, and try to start busting open the center with white. That would be one idea, and not a terrible way to play at all. I decided to adopt another idea, and my point is based on the sense that this d7 square could become a little loose. So the bishop and the knight are all looking at this right now. I would like to play the move bishop b5 check and develop with time, though right now you can simply drop your bishop back and it's not such a big deal. So what's my point? Well, my point is I'm going to trade this knight off first. Bishop takes f6 check. And now after g takes f6, because e takes f6 leaves the d pawn very, very weak. Now bishop to b5 check. And you have two pieces that can interpose, but they're going to have to retreat to do so. So bishop drops back to d7. And after bishop takes d7 and knight takes d7, yes, it's true I've traded off a few pieces, which sometimes you don't want to do when you have a spatial advantage. Sometimes when you have a spatial advantage, you want to keep that pressure, keep pieces on the board. But my point here is that it increases my advantage in time. If we go back just a few moves to before I decided to trade on f6, Black has 4 pieces developed, 3 of them are right here in this little area, and this bishop is locked out of the position. White has 4 pieces developed, and a lot of them are sort of locked out over here on the king side. And after the trades, let's go forward a few moves. Now suddenly, Black has 2 pieces quote-unquote developed, though this knight on d7 really just sort of undeveloped itself, and it's not doing anything active. It's going to have to move again to do anything of use. And White has 2 pieces developed, plus the queen out. So White's already up in development, a little bit more control over the center. The king is out of the middle already. It's castled. Black's king's in the middle, so White is up a large amount of time here. Not only is he already up time, but I can increase this advantage more, and that's what I did with the next move, rook to d5, attacking the queen again and looking to gain even more time. My opponent played queen to c7, retreating the queen back, and suddenly White is going to try to start seeing if he can't find ways to take advantage of the lack of development in Black's position. Well, rook hd1 came next, very natural move, placing the rooks onto the file and also trying to stop Black from developing. This bishop still hasn't gotten into the game. You'd like to play a move like e6, but now the problem is if you play e6, I have the move knight to b5, attacking the queen and attacking the d6 square, and after the queen moves, I can capture on d6 with check before retreating the rook. Black is going to be losing material, so e6 cannot be played without a loss of material and a nice breakthrough for White. So my opponent plays the knight back to e5, and once again this knight has now made 1, 2, 3, 4 moves to be on a square where it already previously was, and still isn't inherently threatening a lot. It's in the center here, yes. We can always kick it with f4 if we want, and we really don't have anything under attack by this knight. Well, I decided to play with knight to b5, and perhaps a little bit inaccurate here. There were other ways for White to continue to improve the position a little bit more slowly, but my point is I'm looking for an early decisive breakthrough. I'm even considering ideas like sacrificing this knight on d6 and then taking the f6 pawn with my queen, attacking the rook, putting pressure on the knight, all these sort of things. So my opponent played the move queen to d8, and queen to d8 helps to solidify that f6 square. So if I sacrifice this knight and Black recaptures, I'm not going to be able to play the move queen takes f6. However, with that said, I looked at this position and said, well, there's only one piece that's not participating. Let's bring it into the battle, knight to f4. And suddenly, we get the sense that even though White is not up any material yet, White must be very close to a decisive breakthrough. And why is that? Well, Black's king is in the middle. His queen, bishop, king, both rooks are all back on their original squares, all ready for the next game to start. The only piece that's out is the knight. White is castled. White has the rooks on the open d-file. White has the active knights and the active queen. It's hard to break through this structure, but White has everything posed to make a real shot at it. And here my opponent did not play the most precise move. I was really thinking he was going to play the move a6, which would have been very testing. I can always drop my knight back to c3, but then Black gains a little bit of time, can try to consolidate a little bit and keep things secure. Instead, my opponent played the move knight to g6, and now White has a chance to break through. So first of all, we have to deal with the attack on our queen, and we don't want to give up time, so knight takes g6 is the best move for White. After f takes g6, because of course the h-pawn is pinned due to the queen, now how can White break through? Well, there are a couple different ideas here, actually. We can play the slow plan, or we can play a quicker plan, and here I wanted to make sure to go all out before my opponent had any chance to move his king out of his central position. And what move did I play? E5. E5, moving right into the control that black has over the square, offering up this pawn. But the point is, you can't take with the d pawn. The queen will fall. That pawn may as well not be there. You can take with the f pawn, but if you do, I can even play a move like rook takes e5, and now I'm threatening to take on d6 with my rook, take on d6 with my knight. This pawn is pinned, this pawn is pinned, the queen is coming into the position. White is ready to come crashing down in this attack. So f takes e5 doesn't look very promising for black's defensive chances. I still think a6 is probably best for black. This would have been the best shot, and here I was trying to figure out the decisive breakthrough. I really want to play this move knight takes d6, but I'm not sure if white has a winning follow-up after the trades occur. There's moves like e takes d6, and now what does white do? You can take this pawn and create a very dangerous passed pawn, but you have given up the knight in order to do it, so perhaps black is able to survive. Unfortunately, my opponent did not play the move a6, which was probably the most testing defense. Of course, white doesn't have to sacrifice either. We have ideas of knight d4 or knight c3. And instead, my opponent decided to run with king to f7. And there's a big problem here with king to f7, though. It moves your king away from the center, so it's less likely your king is getting checkmated, but let's go ahead and count them all up. What's going on here on d6? Well, black is defending 3 times. White is attacking 1, 2, 3, 4 times. White is breaking through. So e takes d6, the very simple solution here. And after e takes d6, now knight takes d6 check. And now white has opened up the position, and these rooks are ready to open up on the queen with discoveries. Or you could trade off the bishop, and I can take you with tempo. My opponent played the move king to g8, and unfortunately, there is just no good defense left. If you move this king over to the g7 square instead, the knight can move with check and you can win the queen. Same thing goes for e8. Of course, there's also rook checks and queen checks that could try to go for mate in that situation. And as we mentioned, even if you take with the bishop, things are just so ugly because after rook takes d6, not only are you attacking the queen, but this f6 square is completely falling. The only way to defend it would be queen e7, and then of course rook d7 just wins the queen. So you can't take the knight, and there's no good way to move the king. King to g8 at least avoids any immediate sort of discoveries, but there's a very nice move here to make it where black cannot under any circumstance avoid more discoveries and more loss of material. So what move sets up another big threat for white? So not trying to crash through too soon. Now white could play a move like knight f7 and try to win the exchange, but we don't want to cash in just yet. We want to maximize what our rewards can be, right? So how can we set up one more attack? Queen to c4, and the point now is there's nothing black can do to place any pieces in this diagonal to interpose. If black moves the king, the knight can check and win the queen. If black doesn't move the king, then there's always rook moves as well as knight moves, followed by rook moves to create any sort of attacking threats that white so desires. If you move the queen to try to get that out of the way of attacking ideas, well, where is it going to go? There aren't many good squares. It can't come to c7. If you come to b6, then there's still moves that attack it, like knight to c8 will attack the queen, and now I'm going to move the rook with check. There's simply no good place for black to put any pieces and avoid a loss of material. Feel free to play with this position as much as you want, but there's just nothing that poor black can do. And in this position, my opponent resigned. So what were the big takeaways from Saturday from rounds 2 and 3? Well, looking for the best squares for our pieces. In the first game, we saw a slow positional battle. We saw the slow process of putting our pieces on best squares, taking squares away from our opponent. And in the second game in round 3, we saw a much quicker battle, getting our pieces to their best squares as soon as possible and punishing the opponent if they leave their king in the center of the board. Hopefully you'll be able to take some lessons away from these games, put them into your own games, and I can't wait to see what you guys do in the coming weeks in your games to come. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and best of luck. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, post any comments, and share via the buttons below. Check out our website at chesswithnick.com for further video, more content, and any postings on lessons, further video analysis, or written analysis that you may be interested in. And be sure to check out our YouTube channel, Chess with Nick, on youtube.com. Have a great day, and wishing you best of luck.